of parent-student-teacher interviews tonight, so we'll probably compress a little bit. Thanks for being here. Today's agenda is as follows. It's tax season, so you are likely going to complete your taxes online when you get going. Once you have income, you should start to complete your taxes because you start to accumulate RRSP room. And so my suggestion would be that you do that online because it's relatively cheap and inexpensive. You can get tax software anywhere, download it, and there's also free software you can get. You're going to do your taxes. And when you do your taxes, you're going to realize how important it is to protect your money as it grows. There are two certainties, and we'll talk about those in a moment. One of them is taxes. We'll talk a little about tax avoidance strategies, tax umbrellas that the government has given us to protect our money and let it grow tax-free, and how important that is. And there's three vehicles I want to talk about. We're going to talk about the Canadian market and how boo it's been, how bad it's been over the last decade. You'll be shocked to see how poorly it's performed. We're into a market crash, a pullback, a correction. Not really a bear yet. A bear is defined as 20%. Corrections defined at 10%, so we're certainly into that. We're going to look back and talk about some tips that we talked about coming into this bear market when stocks were so high and elevated, and some strategies that maybe would have been worth doing if you see a frothy top. And by a frothy top, I mean a market that's really accelerating. We talked about last week, we're seeing some increased volatility, and sometimes that indicates some bad news is coming, and we're into some bad news now. Then we're going to look at technicals. It's important to look at the chart. We get emotional when markets are falling pretty hard. We get panicky. We might do some stuff like sell at the wrong time, or we might buy, catch a falling knife. And so what are the charts telling us, right? When we look at charts, we're trying to eliminate emotion. We're trying to look at the chart and make a good decision based on what we're seeing, as opposed to what we're reading in the paper. Chaos, crashing, scary stuff. All right, off we go. Taxes. So, there's a phrase that there are only two certainties in life: death and taxes. You're going to die and you're going to pay taxes. How much tax will you pay? Well, some of you might say, well, you know what, I got a little job, like they virtually deduct no tax off you, like virtually no income tax. Well, enjoy it while it lasts. Because as you get going, tax is going to increase and increase. So I've got a little table here that I downloaded. Marginal tax rate is an economic term. It describes what percentage you'll pay on the next dollar. So to give you an example, most of you are likely living here.
Phoenix, make sure to stop by the Tuck Shop to purchase your 2016-2017 yearbooks and your Raz Film Festival tickets.
You're working you're going to school full-time for 10 months of the year. You might have a part-time job. You might work a little bit in the summer. You don't have enough time to make a lot of income. So you're likely under the personal exemption threshold of 11.8. In other words, you can make up to 11.8 and not pay a dime in tax, not 1 penny. As soon as you clear 11.8, notice I use the phrase clear. As soon as you clear 11.8, the next dollar gets taxed. Not the 11.8. The 11.8 is exempt. So this is the tax rate on the next dollar. They're called brackets. We're in a new tax bracket. So once you clear 11.8, the dollars you make from 11.8 to 20 are taxed at 15%. These columns over here are for investment taxes, capital gains, dividends, Canadian. We're just worried about here. Interest and regular income. Regular income is job. In other words, you get a summer job, you make $12,000, virtually that's free, no tax. If you make $18,000, the amount from 11 to 18 is going to tax at 15%. Look down here. When you get going, and you're in your 30s and your 40s, and you're a successful executive, whatever you may be doing, and you're pulling in a lot of income, like once we clear 100,000, 40 cents on every dollar you make goes to the government. We are taxed heavily, way more heavily than the States. And I would say you benefit from that because of education. You know that your tuition at university is a lot cheaper than if you want to go to Harvard. And I would say it's healthcare. We know that. Right? You get sick, you don't worry about that. But we pay for that. There's no free lunch. And so I often laughed with my students about the fact that I would never teach summer school. At my income level, I'd be basically, teach for 5 weeks. 3 of them go right to the government. I'm paying the government. Forget it. So, tax avoidance matters. All right, tax avoidance strategies. RRSPs, RESPs, tax-free savings account. Basically, these are umbrellas that you can place things into. I often have staff members who say to me, Mr. Masters, I want to buy an RRSP. What should I do? I'm like, okay, wrong terminology. You purchase something, you put it into an RRSP and protect it there. or you create an RRSP account and you purchase something with that account. Okay, you don't buy an RRSP. So an RRSP, an RESP, a tax-free savings account, this is different than the other two, but anyway, it protects. In other words, if you make $100 worth of interest income, you get to keep the $100. Is that significant? Yes, yes. Because at my level, if I make $100 in a these are called registered accounts. RRSP, Registered Retirement Savings Plan, Registered Education Savings Plan, Tax-Free Savings Account, they're registered accounts. If I make $100 outside of a registered account, I give 50 cents right back to the government. That means if I make 3%, I really make 1.5 points. And I'll tell you the other constant is inflation. Really that phrase should be death, taxes, and inflation. Because if I only really clear 1.5 points and inflation's 2, I'm not even keeping up with inflation. This is the problem for retirees who haven't saved very much money. They might get 3% on a GIC from one of the non-traditional banks, like an e-bank. You may get 3. You only get to keep 1.5 points, and inflation's 2. They're actually losing purchasing power, right? So inflation matters a lot. We watch inflation carefully, and we know the Bank of Canada does too. All right, so let's talk about the power of a tax-free savings account. And you know I've talked about this before, but always worth bearing repeating. As you get to be 18, you can open up a tax-free savings account. I strongly suggest you do. And when you do that, what I suggest you do is start putting some money into it. And the fact that you're actually saving a little bit in a tax-free savings account is the start of investing, because if you don't save anything, you can't invest. All right, we've seen this installment example with Phoenix Finance before. What I'm going to type in here is the annual limit by 2 divided by 26 pay periods. So let's say you and your honey commit to saving the annual limit, which is currently $5,500. There's 2 of you, and we're going to save that amount every 2 weeks. In other words, we're going to take our annual amount, which would be $5,500 times 2, which is $11,000. I typed it in as $5,500, so you see the annual limit. And I divide that by 26 pay periods. And that would basically have you saving $400 every pay period. You do that for 40 years, you get 7. It's 2.4 million. Period. End of discussion. That's all you have to do. I would suggest to you that as a young investor, the tax-free savings account should be your number 1 go-to strategy to accumulate wealth and protect it. Notice, if I grow my money, let's say $400,000, $500,000 of that is actual in my contributions and the rest is my gain, I'd have to give half of that gain back to the government. So the 2.4 million might look more like 1.4 million, which is a lot. So it's really important where you have your investments growing. We want to have them growing in a tax-free environment. We've got to protect them. So I would suggest to you that once you get 18, you open up a tax-free savings account, even if you start to fund it only with $20 after every paycheck, just to get in the habit of savings. And then you'll start to accumulate some money, and then you and your honey can start to kind of commit to having kind of a savings-first investment strategy, and then you can start to grow it, investing in some cheap index funds, and let time take over. Notice I was very conservative here. I just put in 7. I like to tell you we try to get 7 to 9 over the long term. Dividends come in at 4, you're looking at 3 to 5. If I change that 7 to 9, watch what happens. You almost doubled your money. So that would be a surprise to you, I would think. Because you go, well, 7 to 9 is not a 50% increase in my return. It might only be a 25% increase in my return. But you're getting an extra 2 points every period on your money for 4 decades. Okay? Does that make sense to us? So we want to have these tax-free savings accounts, these RESPs, RSPs. RESPs, that's something we're down the road a little bit. I can have a brief conversation with you about that now, though. When you become a father or a mother, open up an RESP for your kid. Right then, the month they're born, open up an RESP. Start saving $100, $150, whatever you can save. The max rate now, I think, is $2,000 a year, and you'll get a 20% grant on that. In other words, the government actually gives you a 20% return every year on your investment. How unbelievable is that? And then the reality is when your kids get to be 18 and 19 and 20 and they get ready to go to school, you're probably going to be sitting on somewhere in the neighborhood of $120,000 to fund their education. And you're not going to worry about, how am I going to pay for Susie's post-secondary? You've done it already. it's way easier to come up with